After doing setups for years, it's very common to see a poorly cut nut, even from the factory sometimes. But I think what we have here is probably somebody got a little creative. What they've done is they've cut the slots here way too deep. You just gotta wonder what they were thinking. When you're playing one string open, it's buzzing, and you've only got one that's like that. It's a pretty straight ahead proposition, and you can do the simple fill it up with baking soda and super glue, and that's just the obvious easy way to fix that single nut slot. In a case like this where all 6 are cut too low, you could and this is what I was thinking of doing, was taking out this nut and either replacing it with a new one or putting a little shim. You can, you know, cut a little tiny piece of something like a piece of business card or something real thin and put it in there. You got to cut it the perfect size to shim it and then glue the nut back in. Some people may think that's rinky-dink or whatever, but it works. Or, you know, get one of those Tusk XL nuts. I was thinking of doing that, but it's nice to also just keep the stock nut in there, because then you don't have to score around the nut and try and bang this out and possibly muss up the finish around the nut. So I actually prefer, some people may totally disagree with this, but I decided to go the route of just filling in all 6 nut slots. I like to tape on either side of the nut in doing this. And this is just so if your super glue falls out of the nut slot, which it often likes to do, it won't get on the fretboard. One kind of optional thing is you can take a little piece of sandpaper and just kind of clean out the nut slots before you start. And that way the super glue has a nice clean bed to kind of stick to. I've never found anything better. I'm sure there's a better way to put the baking soda in the nut slots, but I end up using this knife that I have. I'm using Stumac thin super glue. I like to use these little pipettes, have a piece of paper towel or something handy just in case things get messy. I'm just going to try and clean off some of the excess baking soda right now before it starts. What happens is the super glue likes to roll out of the slot and then bond to any baking soda that you have lying around the nut where you really don't want it. 1 drop is usually all it takes, and then I'll try and clean up around the edge a little bit like that. So there's 2 done. And I'll go through the rest and then come back. All 6 nut slots are filled. Managed to do it without making too much mess. What I'm going to do is file down the nut slots to the correct height, and then at the end sand the top of the nut just to get rid of there's a little super glue that, you know, got on top of the nut. I like to clean that up at the end. But I use Hosco nut files. They're kind of a mid-grade file, I guess I'd call them. They're not like the $100 Stumac type file, but they're also not like the $20 Amazon made in China file. These are made in Japan. I think they're pretty decent. So what you want to do before going too deep on any of these is start checking with a string just to see if you've got enough material in there. Sometimes you'll check and you'll see that, oh, I gotta add more baking soda. And again, that check is to fret there on the 3rd fret and then tap right here, and you won't be able to see it on camera, but I've got plenty of room between the first fret and the string. There's room where it's moving. I know it's going to be ringing well. And it's one of those things where you could probably measure the feeler gauge or something between the first fret and the string, but just over the years it's just become doing it by feel. Basically, I think if you want it real close to that first fret when you're checking it, but not to the point where it's just laying on top of it. The closer you can get it, that means the more comfortable it's going to be able to play on the first and second fret, because the string's not going to be sitting up too high down here. But you take it too far, and then you're back where you started with a nut slot that's cut too low. We're checking for push down on the third fret, tap here on the first fret, and then we're looking for how much space between the string and the top of that first fret. And right now I can go a little deeper, but not too much. And I usually like to think of it like you need a little more space for your low E, probably, because that's the string that vibrates with the most intense action. And then we move on to the A string, and you can see these files are set for 10 gauge strings. The low E is 0.046, 0.036, and you can make them work for 9s. I do. You don't have to buy a separate set of files. You want to keep that file real upright. Maybe sometimes you do a little side to side. Perfect world, I actually have all these strings tuned to pitch. Okay, so now I got the strings all tuned to pitch, and now I can actually just go across and check each one of these, and I can see my baking soda and super glue has got me plenty of clearance above that first fret. I can one by one take the string out of their slot and just do them with the other strings tuned. And you just got to keep putting it back in, tuning it up, and checking, because you don't want to go too far. And if I go too deep, then I'll have to redo the baking soda super glue. Uh-oh. I probably did just exactly what I was talking about. So I just cut my D slot a little too low. It's just barely, but I'm gonna be a perfectionist about it. It's enough that an extra 5 minutes of work, I will redo this one. So yeah, Mr. Know-It-All does exactly what he's telling you not to do. So I get to start from square one a little bit here, at least on the D nut slot. It's a little trick, just put your tape on a on something like that, pull it through under the strings, makes it easy. Okay, get the D out of the way. Now we really only need a little bit just to bring that D slot up a little bit. A little bit of that. So I'll wait on the D slot for a second just to let that glue really cure. Go to the G slot. And see, what I did was exactly what I said you shouldn't do, and I filed a little too much without checking first. So you gotta file and then check without going too far, because yeah, see, I'm almost done with that G slot already. Just So depending on how much material you put in there and how deep the nut slot was to begin with, you may only need a little bit of filing to be done before that's all you need to do. Yep, the G's done. There you go. Now the D's probably good to go. Go back to that one. Fun stuff. Now I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. Just a couple passes. Yeah, see, I'm almost deep enough now. A couple little more passes. And I think we're done there. So I've got all my nut slots cut right about where I want them to be. And doing that check with height, they're all nice and low, but still enough clearance above the first fret to ring. So now we'll just clean up the top of that nut. Even if you've only done one nut slot, you probably want to take a little tiny piece of sandpaper and clean up the top of the nut, unless you're just like Mr. Clean and can do one of these repairs without making a mess, but that's hard to do. So I'm starting with 600 grit. We'll see if that's about right. You just want to, you can see leftover pieces of super glue because they're kind of shiny on top of the nut, and if it takes them off, then that's a rough enough grit, and it does seem to be taking off the little excess on top here. You can sand the front of the nut a little bit, clean that part up, sand the edges, make them nice and smooth and round, a little nicer on your hand when you're playing down there. And what you can do once you've got most of that off, one little piece there. Got it. That's about enough with that grit. Now I'll just use a little bit finer grit, and depending on how much time you want to spend and how many grits you want to go through, you can go to some real fine grits and really make the nut shine. I'm not going to go crazy. This is a road worn guitar. It's supposed to be a little dirty anyway. I use, for something like this, Virtuoso Premium Cleaner. It's like a very lightly abrasive cleaner. You can use it all over the guitar without making marks, but it just kind of cleans up things. Look at that. Looking pretty good. Before this video is over, I just wanted to show one more thing I noticed as I was setting up this guitar. Strings are really nice, playing great all over, but when I was testing it for bending around the neck, I noticed the B string. Hear that little? So when I cut that nut slot, I didn't get it smooth enough on the bottom. So there's a little burr, and when you bend it, it's going over that burr, making a pretty little sound just like that. I've got a little room to cut more on this string and see if I can just smooth it out with the file, but I can't go too far with it or I'm going to cut the slot too deep. So I'm going to try a couple passes, see if that fixes it, and if not, I'm going to pull some sandpaper out. So still got some clearance, but it's still making a sound in there. Take a piece of sandpaper, fold it in half or whatever, get it in that slot, and just gently try and smooth the slot out. You can go too far with sandpaper too, because you're taking off material. You take it down too far and you gotta do the baking soda and super glue again. But if you use fairly fine sandpaper, I think this might hopefully get that burr. We'll see. Let's see, so got enough clearance still. It's ringing good. I'm not hearing it. The real test is if you bend like here on the 2nd fret, because that's putting intense pressure in that nut slot to move the string. And that sanding seems to have smoothed out that burr. After you've done baking soda super glue, if you hear a little ting ting, try and smooth it out either with the file or with some sandpaper.